observed several vehicles that had been involved in a crash. I responded to unit number 3. Whenever I got to unit number 3, I observed a male laying on the hood of the car. I checked him and he appeared to be deceased. I then checked on a female that was laying beside unit number 3. She appeared to be injured but nothing life-threatening at that particular time. At that time, the other emergency vehicles had arrived and began treating the other victims of this. And I then contacted the driver of Unit 3.
Okay, and who is the driver of Unit 3?
Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Coleman? Okay, what did you do when you contacted him?
When I contacted him, I asked him what happened. He appeared to be very incoherent. I asked him, I could smell alcohol emitting from his persons. His eyes were bloodshot. Asked him if he'd been drinking first. He told me no. I had him step out of the vehicle. As he stepped out of the vehicle, another light can fell out of his lap. And I proceeded to conduct an interview with him.
Okay, did you perform any field sobriety tests?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, which field sobriety test did you perform on?
The first one was horizontal gaze in the nystagmus.
Okay, and that's the eye test, right?
Correct.
Okay, and you're looking for the involuntary jerking of his eyes, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that means somebody be intoxicated.
Yes, sir.
That's an indicator of intoxication.
Yes, sir.
Okay, how did he do on that test?
I got like a smooth pursuit in both eyes. Distinct nystagmus and maximum deviation in both eyes. Onset of nystagmus prior to 45 degrees in both eyes, and I did get a vertical nystagmus.
Okay, and based on that, is that an indicator that he may have been intoxicated?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you performed 2 more field sobriety tests, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what was the next one you performed?
The next one I conducted was a walk and turn. The clues that
And the walk turn, that's the walk the line test.
Yes, sir.
For lay people. Okay, what clues did you observe there?
He misfilled the toe on steps 3, 6, and 8. He stepped off the line 3 times going, 4 times coming back. He used his arms to balance. His turn was not made properly, and he actually took 11 steps as opposed to 9.
Okay, and based on that test, do you believe he was intoxicated?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you performed 1 more test, what was that?
It was a one-leg stand.
Okay, and how did he perform on that test?
He swayed, used his arm to balance. He hopped, and he put his foot down 3 times.
Okay, based on all those tests put together and smell of alcohol, did you come to a conclusion whether he was intoxicated?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you thought he was intoxicated?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what action did you take next?
He was in placed under arrest and placed in the rear of my vehicle.
Okay, did you take him to jail or did you take him somewhere else?
Well, actually, I went and observed Officer Stillwagon's field sobriety test. Upon completion of that test,
Okay. Okay, so you observed Officer Stillwagon and he was given a test to the other defendant, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and how did the other defendant perform on those field sobriety tests?
On the horizontal gaze in the nystagmus, lack of smooth pursuit in both eyes, distinct nystagmus, maximum deviation in both eyes, onset of nystagmus prior to 45 degrees both eyes, and he also had a vertical nystagmus.
Okay, and so as we talked about earlier, that would be an indicator of intoxication.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what, and then you performed the one-leg stand, or excuse me, the walk and turn test?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and how did the defendant perform on that?
He could not balance during instructions. He misfilled a toe 4 times. He stepped off the line 3 times. He used his arms to balance, and the turn was improper, and he took 12 steps.
Okay, and based on those number of clues, is that an indicator of intoxication?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then you performed the one-leg stand on him as well?
Officer Stillwagon did, yes.
Or Officer, excuse me, and you observed Officer Stillwagon did that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how did he perform on the one-leg stand?
He swayed. He used his arms to balance. He put his foot down 3 times.
Okay, based on that, did Officer Stillwagon place him under arrest?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you do anything else at the scene?
No, sir.
Okay, at that point, you got one of the defendants in your car, and Stillwagon has him in his car, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, what did y'all do next?
Due to the fact that there was a suspicion of driving while intoxicated and deaths involved in serious bodily injury, They were taken to the hospital for mandatory blood draw.
Okay, explain, please, if you can, what a mandatory blood draw is.
They don't have an option in it.
Okay, I mean, if need be, they would be strapped down and the blood forcibly drawn from them. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay. You took them down there, did they comply and give their blood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you gotten a lab result back on that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And start with Mr. Wooten, what were the lab results on his?
Mr. Wooten's blood alcohol was a .07, and the test did test positive for this presence of Xanax in the system.
Okay. And now .07, that's technically under the legal limit, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'll get into it more with Dr. Queller, but from your experience, your training, there's a combination of alprazolam, which is Xanax, and alcohol. Even if somebody's under the legal limit, just on alcohol alone, could that make them intoxicated?
Absolutely, it would intensify the intoxicating effect that the alprazolam has.
Okay. And then let's go with Mr. Cole.
Mr. Coleman's blood alcohol was a .16, and he tested positive for the presence of hydrocodone in his system.
For hydrocodone, okay. And of course, he was already over the limit, twice the legal limit, just on alcohol alone, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then hydrocodone, that, we'll let Dr. Queller explain exactly, but that also can have increase the intoxifying effects of the alcohol, can it not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. After you drew the blood, then what did you do?
They were then taken to the jail, looked in, during the interview there, they were Mirandized, and they both admitted to racing, to drinking, taking pills, and being involved as the driver in the crash.
Okay, did you have any other involvement with them on that day?
No, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, I'll pass this with us.
Mr. Linden, you're with us.
Officer Baker, again, my name's Timothy Linden. I'm representing these two gentlemen. I'm going to ask you a few questions. I want you to answer me the same way you did Mr. Kovach, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, I want to talk with you a little bit about field sobriety tests. You are trained to give those, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the training y'all do on those are quite extensive.
Yes, sir.
Because there is a right way and a wrong way to do them.
Correct.
Okay. And one of the issues you do to decide on what kind of test to give a person is the situation. In other words, if a person is grossly overweight, certain tests are not applicable because they will not give the right result, correct?
Yes, sir.
Same thing with a certain age. If somebody's over the age of 65, there's certain tests you don't give. You can give alternate tests, correct?
Correct, if they're not able to perform the test.
Right. And an injury, whether known or perceived or not, could impact a field sobriety test, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, both vehicles, as a matter of fact, you saw them and you viewed them on scene, correct?
Very limited, but yes, sir.
And you saw that the airbag on the driver, both vehicles had deployed, correct?
Correct.
And both drivers were not wearing a seatbelt, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Mr. Coleman did not tell you he was injured when you asked, correct?
When I asked, he said he was not.
He was not injured.
Yes, sir.
But he had just gone through a very traumatic wreck. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
As such that the airbag deployed, and that in itself is a very traumatic thing, correct?
It can be.
Okay. And there were alternate tests that you could have given in place of these physically more demanding tests, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you did not, you chose to do a different way.
Correct.
Okay. Same thing for Mr. Wooten. There were other tests you could have done to take into consideration his fact he was just in a wreck with no seatbelt and an airbag deployed that could have resulted in a different reading, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But that was not done, right?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, you also responded to the 911 call about the drag racing, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you are also familiar with the high-speed, two cars going at it, we call it drag racing, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that is a dangerous thing that kids and adults do, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, just because a person smells of alcohol does not mean they're intoxicated, correct?
No, sir.
And just because a person who has a wreck while smelling of alcohol doesn't mean the wreck was caused by intoxication, correct?
Correct.
Sometimes plain old recklessness and bad luck comes into play, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The blood test of .07 and .16 on my clients was taken hour, 2 hours after the wreck?
Within an hour.
Within an hour?
Yes, sir.
And there was testimony earlier about a beer fell out of Mr. Coleman's lap, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that indicated he was probably drinking right before the impact.
Yes, sir.
You're familiar with the concept of extrapolation of the absorption of alcohol taking time, and so the result that could have been an 07 within an hour later could have been much lower when he was actually driving the car, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but you're not gonna, you don't have qualification to testify one way or the other though, right?
Correct.
That's a witness.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
State will call the next witness.
State calls Dr. Queller.
Dr. Clark.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Mr. Kovach.
Thank you. Doctor, could you please introduce yourself to the jury, briefly go over your qualifications?
Yes. Hi, my name is Howard Lynn Queller. I've been a physician since 1978, and I practice family practice and general practice. I went to Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York City. I did my internship and residency in the public health system in San Francisco and Baltimore, Maryland. I practice in East Texas now for 30 years, and I have currently an office in Emory, Texas. I have been working basically with family practice, adult and adolescent medicine.
Okay, Doctor, you know why you're here to testify today, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to talk about several things. First thing I want to talk about is the effects of alprazolam when mixed with alcohol. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you familiar with those effects?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, could you explain that to the jury?
Yes, sir. Alprazolam is a commonly prescribed anti-anxiety medication. It is in the category of drugs called benzodiazepine. These drugs are very similar in their effect on the brain as is alcohol. The effect on the brain is one of sedation and decreasing functioning. So if you have alprazolam in your system, it will depress your reaction time, it will cloud your thinking, it will slow your hand-eye coordination, it causes euphoria, and it certainly will enhance the intoxicating effects of alcohol because they both affect the same parts of the brain. While the receptors are different on the brain, the effect of the substances is the same, and that would be making you lethargic, sleepy, etc. So we all know the effects of alcohol on the brain. It anesthetizes the brain, and if given in too large a dose, it will kill you. It will depress breathing, and depress your blood pressure, and depress your pulse speed. Same thing for alprazolam. If you take enough alprazolam, it will suppress your breathing, and your circulation will collapse. You will go into shock, and you can die from that. So the two together are probably doubly as dangerous as either one of them by themselves.
Okay, so it'll be having a kind of exponential effect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If somebody was under the legal limit, say at .07, but they had alprazolam in their system, could they be intoxicated?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are you familiar with the effects of hydrocodone?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, could you explain those?
Now, hydrocodone is a very commonly prescribed painkiller, and it's in the category called opiate, anything derived from the opium type of molecule. The hydrocodone affects the pain receptors in the brain, and in addition can depress breathing and depress circulation, pulse and blood pressure, cloud reaction time, cloud psychomotor coordination. All of the depressant effects of alcohol can occur with an opiate like hydrocodone. So you will have lethargy, sleepiness, poor reaction time, and certainly the two combined will have an additive, if you will, exponential effect versus one taken by themselves. So the two together are particularly deadly, and I would like to point out that the benzodiazepine If we all recall the case of Karen Ann Quinlan, back in 1976, she had taken Valium, which is the same type of medication as Xanax. Back in the 70s, they didn't have Xanax, they just had Valium, same drug, basically. And she stopped breathing, she had severe brain damage, and was on a ventilator for about 9 months, perhaps less months, but she was on the ventilator for a while. The family wanted to get her off, but she was clearly brain dead. Eyes were disconjugated, she was flailing around. They took her off the ventilator, and it led to a whole problem because she lived for 9 more months in a very deep vegetative state.
Okay. And Doctor, you're also here to testify about injuries to the victims of this crime, are you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let's start with let's start with the deceased, Miss Evans.
Miss Evans was killed basically from blunt head trauma and neck trauma. She had large open fractures of the leg bone, which means the bones were protruding through the muscles in the skin. And she also had a flail chest. Several ribs in a row were broken, so the bellows effect of the chest was not able to work properly, severe chest injury, and she basically died from these injuries, primarily the head injury and the blood loss.
And you said the blunt force trauma that would be caused by being hit by the impact from
The impact directly from a motor vehicle.
Okay. And now let's go with Mr. Giovanni Pimentel. Did you conduct
Yes.
analysis of him?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
He was struck as a pedestrian when the car came back on him, and he had a crushed pelvis. His legs were crushed and his abdomen was crushed, so he had blunt trauma to the abdomen, which severed his aorta, the large blood vessel taking blood from the heart down to the legs. That was cut, and the vein, the vena cava, the inferior vena cava, the large vein taking all the blood from his legs, was crushed and severed. So he basically died from blood loss and exsanguination from blunt trauma from being hit by the car.
Okay. And finally, we have Miss Charlie Pickens. Did you diagnose her?
Yes, sir. Ms. Pickens was struck by the car, and she was hit in the lower abdomen, and it burst her abdominal wall, causing her intestines to protrude out, and upon doing that, tearing the blood supply to the intestines, and she basically died from exsanguination from the evisceration from the car.
Okay. And finally, you had a chance to examine Mr. Riley Cox, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Cox, he's not dead.
No, he sustained severe injury.
Let's talk about his injuries first. What injuries
Okay.
he sustained?
His injuries included a severe closed head injury with damage to the frontal cortex and the parietal cortex. He had a fracture of the C3-4 vertebral level, which caused quadriplegia, can't move arms, can't move legs. He has respiratory failure because the C3-4 nerve helps control the diaphragm, so he has to have assisted breathing. He can breathe on his own, but he has to have occasional assistance with a respirator. He cannot swallow because of the level of his injury to his spinal cord. The muscles for swallowing are uncoordinated, and he has a feeding tube in his stomach, so he'll be continuously fed for the foreseeable future, perhaps all his life, through a feeding tube into the stomach.
Okay, what's his prognosis for getting better? I mean,
Well-
is he a vegetable?
He's not in a vegetative state. He is alert. He has difficulty speaking because the part of his brain, the motor cortex on the side of the brain, controls his vocal cords and his ability to speak. So it's hard for him to form the words. That's called dysarthria. But he also has, because of the cognition problem of his brain being injured, he has trouble understanding what's being said to him. That's called aphasia. And he has difficulty expressing himself. We won't know for months to years how long this type of damage will remain. It may be forever, but he's not in a vegetative state. He can't respond to his environment.
What are his chances of walking again, playing sports?
Most likely zero.
Okay. Holding down a normal career?
Most likely zero.
Okay, most likely he'll be in intensive care the rest
He
of
will
his
be in
life.
intensive care and intensive rehabilitation for probably 1 year, After that, depending upon what level he can achieve, he might be eligible for some type of occupational therapy, but it's too soon to say right now.
Your Honor, at this point, state of pass.
Mr. Linden.
Dr. Quiller, my name's Timothy Linden, and I'm gonna ask you a few questions, okay?
Yes, sir.
I have no doubt you're very qualified for everything you just testified about, and I'm not gonna ask you anything about that part of it, okay? You made a statement, however, about the effects of alprazolam and hydrocodone mixed with alcohol. And the question that was asked is, could a person who took both of those, could they be intoxicated? Your answer was yes, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, you're not sitting here today giving a medical diagnosis that these two gentlemen were in fact intoxicated that day, however, though.
I believe I am.
You are saying that
I'm
they
saying
were
that-
intoxicated.
Yes.
Now, the injuries sustained, and I want to take them one at a time here on Miss Evans. She was a passenger in a car driven by Mr. Wooten, and she sustained massive trauma injuries, open head injuries, I believe you said.
Yes, sir.
And you've seen the photo where the airbag had deployed.
Yes, sir.
And that, even though it's a good thing, it wasn't enough to save her, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, in your training and experience as a doctor, have you seen accidents involving wrecks that had passengers that were not secured by a seatbelt?
Yes, sir.
And have you seen those that were secured by a seatbelt?
Yes, sir.
And as a general rule, those that are secured by a seatbelt do not suffer as much injury as those that are not secured, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it a fair statement to say the fact that she was not wearing a seatbelt could have led to the massive extent of her injuries?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's go to same thing for Mr. Cox, the driver of Unit 2 as well as the passenger of Unit 2. They both sustained injuries, the airbags deployed, but they weren't enough to stop Mr. Cox mainly from suffering the injuries you testified to, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Urbina, the passenger, also sustained some serious bodily injury. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, again, neither one of them were wearing a seatbelt, so is it a fair statement to say that if they had been wearing a seatbelt, that their injuries could have been less?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I have for this witness, Your Honor.
Anything else you say for this witness?
No more questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Doctor. You may sit down.
State rest, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Linden, the state having rested as the defendant at this time, is calling your witness to testify.
I have a brief moment, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would rest.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time, all of the evidence in this case is before you. As I explained to you earlier in the instructions that I gave you, the burden of proof remains on the state at all times. That burden is that they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendants committed the offenses with which the defendants stand charged. In just a moment, you will hear the closing arguments of counsel. I will remind you that these arguments are not evidence, but instead are made to help to sum up and help you understand the nature of this case and the evidence. Mr. Kovacs, on behalf of the state of Texas, and when you're ready, you may present your closing argument to this jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please support. Defense counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about how few bad decisions can affect a lot of people the rest of their lives. And let's talk about those bad decisions. It begins with the decisions to drink alcohol underage and to use drugs, and then to combine those two together. Next, after doing that, they made another bad decision. They got behind the wheel. Okay? Not only get behind the wheel and drive normally, but racing. Okay? But that's the type of decisions you make when you're intoxicated. Now let's talk about how that's affected people in the future. You've heard about from the doctor about the injuries of the victims, 3 dead, 1 in a vegetative state, a couple others with various minor injuries. You haven't got to hear yet from their friends and family, some of them who are sitting out here today. And they're going to be here when you come back with your verdict, okay? And they're going to be asking for justice. And let's talk about what's not going to be what Miss Evans is not gonna be able to do. She's not gonna be able to go to college. She's not gonna be able to get married, have kids of her own. Her parents, they're not gonna get to have grandkids. And I understand that these two individuals, they're young, you know, they made just some bad decisions. But those bad decisions have affected a lot of lives, not just their own. And I want you to remember that when you're back there in your delivery. I want you to remember the victims of the case, not just the defendants, which Mr. Lynn is going to ask you to consider. Okay? And when you do that, I think you're going to see that justice in this case, justice is the maximum. To find them guilty and give them the maximum penalty on all charges. Because if this was one of your kids, I think that's what you'd want. So that's what the state's going to ask. Thank you very much. I have one more thing I'd like to play for you. That's an impact statement.
Hello. My name is Dr. McLeod. The results we've seen on the CT is there's no quality of life, okay? And in the future, he might end up having anger issues with the brain injury that he's had, okay? Do you have any questions? Okay. It's gonna take some long for him to come back around, okay? So we just need to continue to talk to him. He can hear you. Okay? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kovacs. Mr. Linden, sir, on behalf of the defendants.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kovacs said we're here about bad decisions by everybody. Bad decisions by these gentlemen, yes. They made a bad decision, they skipped school, they drank. I don't think that's in doubt. You got some prescription drugs from somewhere, and the testimony is they mixed them. Okay? They made a bad decision. But the really bad decision was racing. It was the first responder, the 911 call said they were racing, almost ran her off the road. What you have here is they're charged with the wrong crime. Intoxication, there's no evidence that what that happened that day was because of an intoxication. The evidence was they were drag racing. They were going at a high rate of speed. They were ignoring posted speed limits. Now, they did happen to have alcohol in their system, but you heard no evidence that said that alcohol led to this wreck. It was just the high rate of speed, which goes right along with the drag racing. There is a crime for that. It's called drag racing. It's a second-degree felony if you injure somebody. It's not what we're here about. They charged them with intoxicated assault, intoxicated manslaughter. To have intoxicated assault, manslaughter, the accident has to be caused by intoxication, and it has to lead to the result. The result of the injury, the result of the death. Yes, there was an accident. You heard the testimony, though. Kids weren't wearing seatbelts. Sad as it is, that does come into play. If they would have been wearing a seatbelt, they might not have been injured to a serious bodily injury amount. They might not have died. yes, they have culpability, but not of what they're charged with. Their lives are changed forever. They're already gonna have to live with the fact that for whatever reason, be it drag racing or something else, they killed people. The law says you gotta be charged with the right crime. I'm gonna ask you to go back, give this serious deliberation, come back, find them guilty, make the state charge them with what they really did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, the evidence is before you, and I'm going to release you at this time to begin your deliberations. Mr. Bailiff, you will take the jury to the jury room, and when you are all assembled there together, you may begin your deliberations.
All rise for the jury. All rise.
All right, come to order, be seated.
Counsel, we have been advised that the jury has reached a verdict in this case. Mr. Bailiff, I would ask you to go and collect our jury and bring it back.
All rise for the jury.